Welcome to the Grief Ladies, the practical guide to what comes next. I'm Kelly Daugherty.
And I'm Karyn Arnold, and we are two grief professionals with over 50 years of combined experience. We're here to validate, educate, and give you tangible tools you can actually use.
Each episode motivates you to take action and reminds you it's okay to want to feel better. This is the Grief Ladies, a guide to what comes next.
Hi, everybody, and welcome back. I'm Karyn Arnold here with my co-host Kelly Daugherty for our podcast today. We're very excited to welcome Shelby Forsythia to be joining us. So thank you, Shelby, for being here. As you know, we are sort of walking through our grief framework here today. We are going to be focusing on the letter I, which stands for interacting. And this is the big part, the discussion that comes up in probably every group I run, every individual work that I do, talking about what I say is the other people, the other people in your lives. We are not doing this alone. We are not on an island. We are definitely having to manage not just our own grief, but the changes and challenges of the relationships. And so it's a big, big topic. And Shelby's already got us very excited for some of the things that she's going to be sharing with us today. So I want to take a minute to introduce Shelby and tell you about all the great things she is doing. So Shelby is a grief coach, author, and podcast host. In 2020, she founded Life After Loss Academy, which is an online course and community that's helped dozens of grievers grow and find their way after death, divorce, diagnosis, and other major life transition. Following her mother's death in 2013, Shelby began calling herself a student of grief and now devotes her days to reading, writing, and speaking about loss. Through a combination of mindfulness tools and intuitive, open-ended questions, she guides her clients to welcome grief as a teacher and create meaningful lives that honor and include the heartbreaks they've faced. Her work has been featured in Huffington Post, Bustle, and the Oprah Magazine. So we are very, very lucky to have Shelby here with us today. And Shelby, I love that student of grief. I've said that to people many times, that's exactly what's happening here. You're learning a whole new way of living. And we do honor that there are a lot of losses that people are going through. Kelly and I both in our work focus primarily. And what I'll always say, what brings me to people is, they've had a loved one pass away. But through that time, there's usually so much more that they are dealing with as well. We don't just get to stop. Everything else kind of keeps coming at you. So there's going to be a lot to be talking about, I think, with these communication and relationships. And I know Kelly has a couple of questions that she would like to start with.
Yeah, thank you. So welcome, Shelby. Super excited to have you and to be able to talk about our interacting pillar in our framework. And so curious, for what do you see are some of the common challenges that people face when communicating with others when they're grieving? And how do you recommend navigating those? I know that's a big question and we could probably spend hours talking about it, but what have you noticed?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the first hurdle for a lot of people, and this was true for me too after my mom died, is just reckoning with this expectation that other people should show up because they're my friends. There's this sense of we've been friends for 30 years, or we raised our children together, or in my case, in college, I knew friends who had also companioned people through the loss of a parent. I lost my mom when I was 21 and in college, and I know I didn't have a lot in common loss-wise with my peers, but I'm like, at least some of you have helped friends through this, so why aren't you helping me? Yeah. And there's this sense of like, I need to grieve my expectations of how I thought my friends and family were going to show up before I even address the painful ways that they are showing up or maybe have disappeared. I think after that, the framework that I use that we talked about before getting on the mic today is called the 11 Toxic Grief Tropes. And they are a list of 11 different ways that friends, family members, coworkers, neighbors, the people in our lives show up in ways that are ultimately harmful to us as grievers. And one of the struggles that a lot of my clients and students have in Life After Loss Academy is I know I'm receiving their support as hurtful, but I can't pinpoint why. And so this framework helps you pinpoint, is it hurtful because they're trying to get you to see the bright side? Is it hurtful because they're comparing their loss to yours? Is it hurtful because they keep changing the subject every time you walk into a room? Is it hurtful because they keep trying to tell you that everything's going to be okay or demand that you be over it already? What exactly is it about your relationship that feels hurtful or painful to you? And so the framework that I use in my work is let's establish that this person is not a safe place for your grief, but then let's pinpoint exactly why. What behavior or what phrases are they using that feel most unhelpful to you? And then you can set boundaries around that or make new requests of your relationship. And the phrase I always like to use is grief has changed my terms of engagement. And so approaching a friend or approaching your boss or approaching a neighbor and saying, grief has changed how I interact with everyone, or grief has changed my rules of engagement with others. Can we set new rules for how we interact with each other is a really good starting point for doing that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I absolutely agree. And I mean, it's just, there's so many different ways that our friends and family don't always show up the way we need them to when we're grieving and how hurtful it could be. And I think what you talk about with the expectations, right, is the biggest thing. And when we have expectations, it just leads to more difficulties and more of our own suffering. I'm a big believer in and challenging our expectations of what other people are going to do. Just because maybe we showed up for them that way doesn't necessarily mean they can be that way for us. And so once you've kind of established this and helped them realize that, what are some of the boundaries that you would recommend people set?
Oh, sure. I think a lot of it is based on, so in Life After Loss Academy, I teach my students to sort people in their lives into 3 different categories. There are green light people who are your grief allies. These are people who are always supportive, who have lovely words to say or supportive things to say. They remember your grief anniversaries. They might say your person's name. They do things without asking, or they ask for consent to do them, like, can I come over and mow your lawn? But they don't necessarily wait and say, let me know if you need anything. um, the second category is yellow light people. These are people that are like sometimes supportive, but every now and then they say like a bummer thing about your loss, or why aren't you over it yet? Or start comparing losses to yours, or you think that's bad. I had to grieve uphill in the snow both ways. Like there's like sometimes they're supportive, sometimes they're not. And then there's red light people. And these are people who flat out are never supportive of your grief, whether they have never grieved themselves or they've never let themselves grieve their own losses. And so they're just incapable of offering support that feels helpful to you. And in this framework, I invite people to pick a person either from the yellow or the red light category. It doesn't really matter. Some people like to start with their most difficult relationships first because it's like, well, pardon my French, but if they start as an a-hole and they continue to be an a-hole, I can grieve them and release that relationship. Yeah. A lot of people prefer to start with yellow light people because there can be some hope for repair. Like they're getting it right some of the time, so maybe I can encourage that behavior and then we like prune off the rest. And then we identify which of the 11 toxic grief tropes that this person is exhibiting. So for instance, if they're an awkward avoider, every time I bring up my grief, they change the subject. Something you might say in conversation, whether you do it over a text or over the phone or email or in person, whatever's most comfy for you, however you usually communicate with this person, would be to say something like, I notice that every time I bring up my mom, you change the subject. And I don't know if you're doing that on purpose. You can always give people the benefit of the doubt. I don't know if you're doing that on purpose, but it really bums me out when that happens and it makes me feel like I can't talk about her with you or that you don't know how to talk about her with me. In other relationships, so you kind of take an inventory of what green light people do well, it's really helpful for me to have you ask questions about my mom, whether it's related to current events in the world or the music that's playing while we're working side by side or something that happened in my life last week. Could you try asking one question a week about my mom and make some very concrete request of the relationship and see how that goes? But what I always tell people to do in Life After Loss Academy is before you even have this conversation, make a plan for your 3 possible outcomes. If they respond well to your request, if they respond poorly to your request, and if they don't respond at all. So if they respond well, thank you so much. I'm excited to try this with you. I want to continue to be your friend. I know grief is weird and like we're trying to do this together and I've changed and we've changed and everything's changing right now. Thank you so much for listening. If they respond poorly, I need to step back from our relationship for a little bit. I'll be in touch when I'm ready. If you reconsider, let me know. And then if they don't respond at all, especially if you do it over email or text, check to see that they got your message because technology can be weird, as we all know. Things can get delayed send or lost in translation or go to the spam folder for whatever reason. And if they did receive it, but just didn't respond, maybe they're busy, maybe they're having a season of grief of their own that you may or may not know about, say, just checking to make sure you got my last message. I really care about our relationship and repairing this with you and continuing to stay in contact, especially as I'm weathering this really hard thing. I'm standing by. And that's a great way to have like a plan for what are you going to do if they do everything you asked for, nothing you asked for, or just didn't respond to your request at all? And then you can go from there.
Yeah. I think that
Love
that's a
that.
great idea, not just to give the advice, but also like, and then what happens? We're putting this
Mm-hmm.
out there. I think what I encounter a lot of times that people feel frustrated by is like, why do I have to be the one doing all the work? I'm the
Yes.
one that's grieving, and I say to people, like, it would be nice if people just knew how to come in and what to say and how to help us. But it's like, the equivalent of going to the hairdresser, sitting down and not saying anything and hoping that the hairdresser just reads your mind and gives you exactly what you want. We're not going to do that. So we do have to communicate. It just happens to be a particularly difficult time to do that. And I've had some, degree of some people really being very resentful, of having to be the one to communicate, where others say, yeah, I guess, that's probably a good way to do it. What I try to remind people in the end, you're the one that benefits. Yes, it is hard, that you're the one having to kind of take these steps and take the initiative, but the outcomes can be so favorable, especially when we're putting the work into these relationships. The bottom line, it's a big change. We've changed. People don't really know who we are. Do we laugh at the same jokes anymore? Do we still like the same things? So they're trying to navigate some of that. So to kind of give some clear guidance and direction, I just think is so, so helpful, and communication helps.
Yeah.
Shelby, do you find people will say to you, yeah, I've already talked to them about this. Like, I think sometimes people get frustrated and feel like if I say it once, that should be enough. And then if I don't get that favorable response the one time, I guess that's it. But I don't know I mean, I have some thoughts about that, but how do you handle that situation when people feel like they have communicated?
I actually don't receive that a lot, and I think it is because of the very clear structure of the framework that I use. I don't know if it's just me being a hyper direct person, but I'm like, if you're gonna have new terms of a relationship with a person, I would say make it an official conversation. Make it feel as if, when a family member or a friend is like, we need to talk, and you're like, oh, something's coming.
Yeah.
Like, I
Mhm.
I encourage grieving people to have it take that serious of a tone, because it is about the future of your relationship. And to your point earlier, I think a lot of the frustration of having to be the griever and the teacher, and this is something I find myself validating a ton from my clients and students, is this costs energy.
Mhm.
And energy is something you have in very short supply right now. I say your energy is precious and it is limited. And so
Mhm.
a lot of people in Life After Loss Academy, for me and my framework that I teach, we don't do this until you have felt safe in the world first, until you have released the person you used to be in the life you can no longer have, until you've started folding loss into your life. You've got a really solid foundation you're working with. Then you zoom out. How are you doing grief with other people? Because as you said, grief doesn't happen in a vacuum. No person is an island, but I need you to feel sturdy on your own 2 feet first before you start going setting boundaries with other people. Because if you do, and you end up feeling emotionally raw, or as one of my clients said, emotionally hungover, you have no safe place to return to. So we more often practice, how do I ground my nervous system and create pockets of peace and calm and stability inside of my day, so that when I do go to set those boundaries and I am unheard, or I am rejected, or I am let down, and it turns out I have another friendship to grieve on top of the divorce or the death of my aunt, or the loss of my health, then they have a solid place to return to. I will say something that, um, in bringing up people who said, I've set this boundary before and they're still not listening. I've never said this out loud before, but you might even call in a practice of like gentle parenting. Like, remember 2 weeks ago, I requested this X behavior from you, and you just did that thing again, and it's just as hurtful as when you said it before. Are you interested in changing? Are you interested in trying what I've asked of you? And for some grieving people, these repeated behaviors can be like the straw that breaks the camel's back, of like, they show me over and over and over again that they're unwilling to relearn. I'm thinking of like trans children being dead named by their parents over and over again. And no matter how hard they try to correct pronouns and correct how you address me in public and in front of our friends and even within the privacy of our home, that is damaging to a person to receive. And enough of that, and I can't name the tally for you. I can't tell you the exact number, but some grieving people have a higher tolerance for that than others. And for me, a tool that I offer in much of my work is the phrase right now as an addition to the end of every sentence. And so instead of saying, I'm done with this friendship, saying, I'm stepping back from this friendship right now, or in this season, or for the time being, or for the foreseeable future, whatever prepositional phrase. A lot of my tools are grammatical, but whatever prepositional phrase you can add on to the end of this that gives it the sense of impermanence. My person is dead forever, but this relationship may not be dead forever. It's just dead to me right now. That can be a way to, I can revisit this when I have a higher tolerance for, pardon my French, but people being butts. Like I will revisit this when I'm not so tender, because I'll tell you, in the early days of my grief, my mom's death, my best friend's death from COVID, any mention of someone having cancer, someone laughing at masking policies, I had no tolerance for that. Memes on the internet, people in real life. I minored in psychology in college, and I walked out of the classroom when the professor unexpectedly covered cancer and changing health as a result of how someone's psychology and mental health might change, because it was not on the syllabus. I was not expecting that. And another teacher in a class that I took was talking about funerals. It was a political class, and talking about the death of major political figures, John F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King Jr., how the deaths of major figures affected the course of politics, and seeing images of hearses going down the street and mourners in black and family members and children crying. I was like, I gotta go. And tolerance, very low. 12 years out from my mom's death, if somebody wants to say, oh, there's a reason she died, it's how you got to become a grief coach and an author, and it put you on the path you're on now, and aren't you so grateful? I have a higher tolerance for receiving things like that. But for me, it not only took time, but it takes, what you do with the time matters. And building up a tolerance for people saying weird, meaning things in my direction has changed. And I think some grieving people just have higher tolerance for that than others. And you can't tell them what the magic number is, but to validate for every griever in the world that it costs energy to be in relationship with other people, but to also set boundaries and negotiate relationships with other people can be really, really helpful as like a foundational layer.
Yeah. And I think it's so important, like you said, to like set that expectation. Hey, I need to sit down with you. I need to talk to you about something, because I think when we don't do that, it comes out sideways, right? It comes out in the heat of the moment. Oh, you never do this, or and it can't be productive.
Yeah. Yeah. And in the course that I teach, I offer like little tips and tricks for this. Like, the person that you're talking to. Are they a morning person or a night person? Are weekends better for them or weekdays? Do they have a trip coming up? Are they planning a wedding? Did they just have a baby? Like, maybe wait a minute. Are they a person who prefers to receive text messages? Would they receive a handwritten letter better? Like, for a parent, a grandparent, maybe, who would rather open some mail and know that this is a serious thing because it's written on real paper. Like, that's a thing for some people. For me, I love a text message that says at the very bottom, respond when you're ready. That's like my favorite thing to receive. I'm like, there's a digital paper trail. I now have permission to respond when I'm ready, but I can go back and read it and think on it and marinate on it. So when I have hard conversations with family members or friends or things like that, that's my preferred medium. But kind of like, how do you normally talk to this person? And then how can you set the tone of like, this is significant and relationship changing? And also point to grief as the thing that has changed your relationship. They are not necessarily the problem, and you don't want to make an enemy out of someone that you have been in some sort of relationship for potentially years and years, if not decades. But to say grief has now entered the chat, literally or figuratively, and to say that changes the ways I have started to communicate with people. It changes how I see myself, and it has changed all my relationships by proxy. So I am not attacking you as an enemy. I'm saying grief has made this different. And can you adapt with me because I'm being forced to adapt?
Yeah. I think it helps anytime we can identify we're on the same team.
Yeah.
When my kids were little and they were having a disagreement, I used to say, sit down, talk to each other, and realize, I'd say, do you want to get along? Do you want to get along? You ask somebody, do you want to get along? They're going to say, yeah, I want to get along. And so we are working more toward the same goal. It's just everybody's coming in with their own history, their own hurts, their own belief system. There's so many different things that are, at play. And I find one thing that can be difficult sometimes for grieving people is that they don't want to talk about it, but they don't not want to talk about it. And so for the people in their lives, I was actually doing work one time with a couple, and she had lost her brother. And, her fiance is very understanding, very helpful. And he's saying, I'll tell her I'm here if you want to talk about it. And she's like, yeah, but I want more than that. I want something different than that. I think it's like the specific. So, actually, Shelby, one thing I'm curious about, I find what does come up for me a lot in terms of different scenarios are people who have maybe had a loss, particularly the loss of a parent, and find their spouse or their partner is not being as understanding, maybe even compared to some friends and things like that. I think sometimes maybe they feel a little more hurried, a little bit more rushed. It seems like, their spouse or partner is like, okay, we ready to kind of get back to our routine and do, our life again. And I need help around the house and, those kinds of things. So do you find that there's a common scenario or, a situation where this comes up particularly often?
The one I've seen the most, and this has been surprising to me, I think only because of my age, is a lot of people who come to my work are generally between about 25 and like 65. There's like a wide range of people who find and discover me online, but a lot of people who choose to become one-on-one clients with me or join my course are often women in their 50s or 60s, and they say, I had this friend for 20, 30 years.
Hmm.
Someone died, often a parent. My best friend came to the memorial, and I never saw her again.
Hmm.
And this sense of just, and this is one of the 11 toxic grief tropes, the disappointing disappearer. It is the person, for whatever reason, after the memorial, after 3 months, after the casserole meal train season was over, whatever the case may be, just vanishes off the face of the earth. And for one of my clients, she's like, I know she's still alive. We follow each other on social media. I've reached out on Instagram. I have texted her. I've handwritten her letters, and she has just never responded to anything. And there's this sense of great despair and bafflement of how could this happen? Not only how could this happen in the immediacy of my grief, but how could this be who this person is?
Mm.
How could this fathomably be their response to loss? Because seemingly over 20 years, you had to have been through some life stuff together. Nobody gets 20 peaceful years on this planet. That if the last 5 years hasn't taught us anything, but this sense of I am not only grieving the fact that she's not showing up for me, but I'm grieving the person I thought she would be. I'm grieving the history of the past 20 years because now this is how it ended, and I seemingly have no rationale, no understanding. A lot of conventional folks would say closure, but I don't believe closure is real. But just no answer, just no answer. It is another why plopped onto the why pile of why is this my life? Why am I going through this? Why me? Why is this my reality? And then why did my friend do this? Why is this the end of our relationships? Why does she get to decide that this is the end? And why am I, kind of to your point again, the person reaching out, trying to make a connection, teaching her what I need and getting no response? And I think I don't necessarily want to rank the painfulness of the toxic grief tropes because an obnoxious one-upper who's playing Suffering Olympics with you can hurt just as much as a judgmental jerk who says, why aren't you over it yet? But the disappointing disappearer is the biggest one that leaves you with all these unanswered questions. And that is another grief that so many of my clients and students carry. And often it is these relationships that have been going on for 10, 20, 30 plus years and just vanish out of nowhere.
If you've connected with our grief framework on the podcast, you'll find even more support inside our private, free Facebook community. Each week, we'll walk through grounding, rebuilding, interacting, evolving, and finding with prompts and practical tools you can use right away. It's a place to connect with others who are on their own trail through grief. Search the Grief Ladies community on Facebook and join us.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I find, what I talk to people about a lot is that there are things that bring us together as friends. Maybe if it's that long, maybe we went to college together or we worked together or, maybe our kids were young together. Like there were things that were linking us and connecting us. And as we are grieving, our primary thought is going to be about our loss. It's very difficult to be making space. How many people say that I don't really care? They lose interest. They're feeling further away from, earlier parts of their life or themselves that they recognize. So those connections just don't seem to not to say that they don't matter as much, but I don't feel as connected to it. I don't feel like that person. So being that person that was connected, I just find though that people are disappointed. They get really disappointed in people and very hurt. And I've had people say a lot of times, well, I guess you find out who your friends are, and who
Mm-hmm.
your real friends are. And I do try to work with people through that and say, well, let's not, I think sometimes we almost kind of want to give up on the friendship. Maybe it would just be easier to just, and maybe there are times that the relationship has been tested or challenged, but I think also it's important to remember that there are certain people who can bring different things into our lives. And being a primary support may not be that role for us. And we can get that elsewhere. But when I'm ready to enjoy myself again or to feel, parts of myself of things that we used to do together, maybe we can find our way back. Like you said, with the right now, which is something that I use all the time and talk to people
Mm-hmm.
about all the time, it opens that door for hopefulness, and possibility where I am versus where I may be at some point, but
Yeah.
it's a lot to have to be processing in the midst of also just trying to, have a new daily routine and, everything else being impacted as well.
Yes. An analogy I recently used, I also have a podcast called Grief Grower, but an analogy I used to answer the question, is grief selfish? Which someone wrote in and asked me. I said, grief is a lot like surviving a natural disaster, but one that only impacted you. So it's like your house that got destroyed, your windows that got broken, your food supply or water supply that has dried up. And your mission in the aftermath of loss is to look at all these vital things for survival and to rebuild or repair them as fast as you can. And so grief is not selfish. The loss has happened to you. You are the person to whom the chaos is happening, and you are also the person responsible for repairing from the chaos. And so many grieving people, I think, say it would be so much easier if something visible had happened, like I'd broken my leg, or if I'd gone through a natural disaster and a tornado came through my house. Like it would be so much easier if people could see this every day. But because I'm upright and I'm speaking words you can understand, you think I'm okay. And I think to your point of kind of considering what your friends are good at, this is something that I write and talk about a lot. I learned it from a fellow grief practitioner, Elisa Forneray. But for supporters, she often recommends making a menu of your gifts because a lot of people are not capable of being a primary emotional supporter. They do not have the capacity to sit next to you on the couch and binge watch Law and Order over and over again and just like sit with you in your grief. What one of my clients called Couch Island. And but there are friends who are really good at issuing invitations and being cool if you don't accept them. Hey, we're going to go see this band in the park on Friday night. Are you in? Are you out? Totally cool if you say no. When I made reservations at this restaurant for 5 of us on Tuesday, are you in or are you out? And to as the grieving person to make a list of what are my friends and family members good at that I already know that they're good at. So if you have a friend who's good at cooking, or I'm the extrovert friend, so people need to make calls to a customer support line. They're like, tell Shelby, and she will call and sit on hold and talk to. I'm like, give me the account number as long as it's not like health protected information, which I shouldn't have access to. But like if you got to call customer support for the cable company or the internet company, I will gladly sit on the phone in your apartment for an hour and a half and figure it out and be so nice to the guy on the phone. But like you know your friends and family members, what are they already good at and what can you ask of them in that respect? So even thinking, here's my 3 or 4 main friends. What 3 things are each of them uniquely good at? And those are things you could reach out potentially and ask for. Say, I know you said let me know if you need anything, but that's too vague for me. Would you be interested in, again, coming to watch a movie with me on Saturday night? I know you love films and telling me about all the characters in them. Or would you be interested in driving me to this appointment that I have next Tuesday to finish all this crap for the will that I have to do? Or would you be interested in walking Sandy with me on Mondays and we can just go and get coffee and walk the dog because I know you like spending time with her. Like, I know you already like doing those things. So can you support me by doing those things consistently is a way that grievers can have a concrete way to be supported, but in ways they know their friends are already good at, instead of making their friends, heavy air quotes for people not listening on or not watching on video, but making their friends become good at grief, feeling less like they have to be the teachers and more like I'm just asking them to do more of what they know they're already good at.
Yes, absolutely, and I use that all the time as homework. Like, this is what I want you to
Yeah,
do. I want
yes.
you to reach out to one of those listeners to actually listen, right? Reach out to your doer to do something for you. I know you don't wanna ask for help, and you're not good at that, right? But, this is your challenge for this week. This is your goal for this week is to try to do that because our friends and our family, I think at the end of the day, most of them do wanna help us. We have to give them
Yes.
that opportunity to actually help us with something we want or need.
Yes, well, and I don't know if this is true for the two of you as well, but when a friend thinks of me for a very specific thing like that, like, oh my God, you thought of me when you're calling your to make a dentist appointment? I'd love to. Like and to have the grieving person be like, how would you feel if a family member reached out and asked you to, if they're a painter, to paint something custom for their house, or if they're a chef, to cook a custom meal for them and drop it off? Like, if somebody asked you to do one of your gifts, it would feel like the easiest thing in the world and one of the most flattering because it shows that they know you. And so to do that of your friends and family members who may be standing by ready to help but don't know what to do with themselves, and that's everybody's excuse. I don't know what to say. I don't know what to do. I don't want to be a burden. I don't want to remind them of their loss, blah, blah, blah. Asking them something very specific you know they're already good at is such a good backdoor into being helped without you having to teach them how to be a better grief supporter. You don't have to make them grief literate, and for them to do something that they already have the tools and capacity and practice doing with you specifically.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think it's a huge relief. I mean, overall, I think you had mentioned it earlier on, Shelby, that like people I believe are mostly well-intentioned, and it
Okay.
is just a matter of them feeling ill-equipped, afraid of all the things, making it worse, saying the wrong thing. I think, that comes into play. So I think people, for the most part, of course, won't be everybody, but I think for the most part, people are really welcoming of a specific direction, like, thank goodness, I haven't known what to
Hmm.
do. And I do believe people like to help. I mean, it feels good to be able to be useful and to be helpful. So, as you said, kind of trying to focus, I think that's great advice on what specifically they could do that'll be in their comfort zone, you know. And also, you had mentioned this earlier about the idea that this is stuff that maybe comes a little bit later. With
Hmm.
the work that Kelly and I do, what we are really trying to help people understand that this is not something you're going to be able to do or have the mental capacity for at the very beginning. So
Right.
anybody who's just starting out is thinking like, I can barely like brush my teeth, so I'm not like ready for all this stuff. So we have to focus on the basics, and we have to make sure we're sleeping and eating and make sure we're getting some sense of routine down. And there's other things that we may need some time to work through before we can get here. But I think once you do, you kind of know that point, like you're ready to, or maybe just feeling more eager to expand, that support system.
Yeah. I tell my clients and students, I'm like, if you have time to think about how you're frustrated by the relationship, you probably have the time to set a boundary
Yeah.
or start having that conversation.
Yes.
It's something I learned very early on in my grief work because people often have the question of when do I know that I'm ready to do grief work? And I'm like, when you start asking that question,
Mhm.
when the numbness or the shock has worn off, and or you've gotten to enough of a baseline in your everyday where it's like, I can get up, I can make breakfast, I can care for the others that I have to care for in my household or in my community. I can practice basic hygiene. I can kind of read some words. I can follow traffic signs well enough potentially to like get myself to and from. When you start asking the question of when am I ready for grief support, that's usually a really good indication you're ready to work with a coach or a therapist or anybody else, or join a community of other people looking for grief support as well. When you start being frustrated by the state of your friendships,
Mhm.
that is often a good sign that you're ready to start setting some boundaries, or that you have the energy to do so.
Are you ready to take the next step on your grief journey with real tools and compassionate guidance? The Grief Ladies are launching a brand new workshop series based on their signature grief GRIEF framework. 5 trail markers to help you find your footing after your loss: grounding, rebuilding, interacting, evolving, and finding. Each workshop focuses on one trail marker, guiding you through practical steps to move from surviving to living again, all in a space that's honest, supportive, and real. Led by grief experts Kelly Daugherty and Karyn Arnold, these workshops combine decades of experience with tools you can start using today. Visit griefladies.com to explore the upcoming workshops, because you don't have to climb this mountain alone.
Well, so now we're going to switch gears a minute, Shelby. We're
Yeah.
going to talk more a little bit about your own grief experience. And one of the things that I'm a big believer in is that we kind of get stuck on the ending. We get stuck on that death, that we forget to remember our loved one's life. And so one of my things is to celebrate their life. What does that look like? How can we stay connected to our loved one, keep those meaningful connections that we had with them? And I know you mentioned previously that your mom died and your best friend died, and I would love to hear how you can keep that connection. How do you celebrate their life? And I would also love for you to share their names with us if you're okay with that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to do another self plug. I just did a podcast episode on this. So if people listening are unsure of how they want to remember their people who have died, I think it's episode 16 or 17, maybe 18 of Grief Grower. It's how to remember a loved one who died using a signs and symbols library. But this is how I remember my mom and my best friend. My mom's name was Sandy, and my best friend's name was Tammy. And I started doing this for myself, but now I teach it to other people, is after my mom died, there are ways that I knew already that I wanted to remember her, like objects I connected with her, or sights and smells and sounds I would connect with her. I used the lens of the five senses. And so every time I drink green tea, I think of my mom. She would have like 8 cups of green tea in the morning, which was basically one tea bag, but she'd just keep watering it down until it was just hot water. And now I do the same thing because I don't know, we become our parents eventually. I loved songbirds and sparrows, and my mom did too. And there was a hymn that we would often listen to that had sparrows as a word in it. Old hymns played on a piano or something that we enjoyed sharing together. The song "Knock on Wood." You better knock, knock, knock on wood. Do, do, do. Yeah, that one. She used to embarrass my sister and I by doing her high school poms routine to that song every time it came on the radio. And so now every time I hear that song, I'm like, hello, mother. And then also finding pennies on the ground, because she was a see a penny, pick it up all day long, you'll have good luck person. And so heads up, tails up, doesn't matter. She'd pick up the penny. And so those are starting points I had for her of things that remind me of my mother. But and so through the five senses, sight, smell, sound, touch, taste, I kind of started making little columns of these sights remind me of my mom, or these sounds remind me of my mom. And then as I have grown in relationship with her, I feel as if, and I have the belief that our loved ones continue to communicate with us after they die, I have gotten to add more things to that list that I would have never attached to her in real life, because I've seen them often enough in instances where I'm thinking of her or missing her that I'm like, that's got to be some kind of sign or symbol that I need to take into account. The biggest example, and the one I tell in my second book, Your Grief, Your Way, is after her death, I kept seeing palindromes everywhere. So like 121, 424, 838. It was just the same numbers forward and backwards. And it was usually 3 digits, 919. And I was like, what is it with the palindromes? My first address was 424. The bus I took to work, 151. Like there were just palindromes surrounding me. And I'd look at the clock and it wouldn't be 1111, which is special for a lot of people, but it would be 343. And I was like, I don't know what this means. And I kept Googling, seeing palindromes, number palindromes, spiritual meaning, symbolic meaning, whatever it is. And finally, one day I came across, you might be seeing palindromes because a parent is trying to connect with you, because you know what else is a palindrome? MOMDAD.
Mm.
And so every time now I see palindromes, I get chills thinking about this.
I love
Every
that.
time I see palindromes, I think of my mother. And when my wife and I were getting married, my wife has lost both of her parents, her mom, MUM, she's from Canada, and her dad, DAD. We chose a palindrome for our wedding day, 525. And so we got married on May 25th to incorporate all of our people with us. And so I accepted that as a sign and symbol from her, but now I purposefully choose palindromes whenever I can in other areas of my life to launch things, to create things, to have special date nights or things on, because it makes me feel like they're folded into my life. So palindromes have become part of my signs and symbols library. My best friend Tammy was just like, she, even more than my mom, which is a hard comparison to make, but I think only you can rank your losses. My mom died when she and I were in the middle of a fight, and that's a separate story for another day that you can hear on a whole bunch of other podcasts that I've done. But my best friend and I had no ill will when she died. She and I were just pure love, pure chosen family for each other for more than a decade. We went to college together, and I was her neighbor 2 blocks away, her emergency contact, and just like this, like we were just the closest people. And it was amazing the ability she had to make everyone in her life feel that way. She had like 42 best friends. I don't know how she managed, but like it was freaking incredible. And in her signs and symbols library is a lot of stuff that I know that she loved in life: corgis, bubble tea, pancakes, basically any carb or anything with sugar in it. So like cupcakes, candy, lollipops, anything that's the color pink, Hello Kitty. Like there was just so much stuff that she loved surrounding herself with that was joyful. And just this past summer, I got the honor of being selected in a lottery to paint a mural in our neighborhood. And you can go see this on my Instagram. I don't know when this is coming out, but from June 2025, you can scroll back on my Instagram. And the theme of the mural contest was All Together Now. And it's kind of like a community mural wall where there's like 150 slots and everybody gets a white slot and then you just paint your mural. And there's kids and adults and seniors and I didn't know it was judged until the day of. And I was like, oh crap, we're competing for something. But my best friend Tammy was a baker and she loved pie. And so I chose to do a pie mural with 9 different pies. Well, 13 different pies, because 13 is a representative number for her in Judaism. But all the flavors were chosen by our core friend group of 9 friends. We call ourselves the Love Squad. And so there was apple and pumpkin and peach and cherry and blueberry and all these other pies that she would have eaten or made when she was alive. And the middle of the mural said, "Life is sweeter when shared," which was definitely her belief that like community and friendship was really what held the whole world together. And symbols I have for her are like hearts and bumblebees and daisies. And so we put hearts and bumblebees and daisies and all this fruit all over the mural. And it was so much fun to create. And unbeknownst to me, we ended up winning first place. And it was such a validation from her that like this expressing grief through art and honoring her with symbols that she loved, with foods that she loved, with this sense of friendship and community. It just is another way I have insisted, and I tell my grieving clients and students, you can insist that they come with you. You can fill your home with reminders of them. You can go on, I call it grief scavenger hunts, but you can go out in the world and say, how many songbirds can I see today? I worked with a client who lived in Australia, and there's a lot of cockatoos there. And every day she saw a cockatoo, she would think of her ex-boyfriend who died by suicide. And she goes, oh, there's John. There's John. There's John. And even if you don't believe that there's a place where we go when we die, which some of my clients do not, they're like, what do I do if there's not a God or an afterlife or anything like that? I say, then they're just reminders of their presence in your life and their impact on you. It is not necessarily that they're trying to say something to you or communicate with you or push you in a decision direction somewhere in your life. It's just a reminder that they were here. And in some ways, there are pieces of them that are still here. So that's how I choose to carry both of them forward in my life.
I love that, Shelby. That's beautiful. Thank you so much for
It's so
sharing
fun.
about them and all of those. I love that. I love the scavenger hunt idea.
I do too. It's one of the, I had the joy and the privilege of being in conversation with Cheryl Strayed, the author of Wild, in 2020 over Mother's Day. And she talked about how her mom, Bobby, always taught her before her death, and then Cheryl took this forward into Tiny Beautiful Things in her work and book and stuff, of like, always look for the beauty in the world because there's something beautiful to be found. And so for me, I kind of twist it and say, always look for reminders of your person because they are always there to be found. And I encourage people in the Signs and Symbols library, don't just choose one thing for each of your 5 senses, list as many as you can think of because that just opens up more possibilities to feeling surrounded by them. And you can bring them to you. Like you can buy I have a picture frame for Tammy on my desk that has honeycomb around it, like little bumblebee honeycomb things. That's something I brought into my own space. But then there are things that can happen unintentionally or, quote, magically, should you choose to believe it, like finding a penny on the sidewalk. I didn't put that there. But both of those things, the end result is the same. Whether you bring it to yourself or it happens organically out in the world, I feel connected. You will feel connected. And that's truly an end goal that benefits everyone. There's no downside to that.
Yeah. And like you said, it speaks to the connections. I think remaining open to it is what's really important. I talk to people about that a lot. And, because there's some people that have all, I know like in a group setting, you'll have some people that are just talking about all these different things. You can tell the people that are kind of like, I'm not getting any of that, like I'm not seeing anything. And, so I think one thing I suggest to people is just to be staying open to it. And interesting how I think in a way it does speak to continuing relationships and its own form of communication, even with a person who's not here and how we're trying to feel connected. Because that's a big part of it. We're through our grief trying to feel better, but then also feeling very conflicted about feeling better. There's a lot of strange things that come with that. So I think if we can feel like we are maintaining those connections with our loved one, we feel like we have more permission, to be participating here now. And so that can be just a helpful way to do that is to have, be looking for some of those signs and seeing those. So,
Yeah.
Shelby, one thing I want to make sure that we do today, we had told you before, I think that we really do try to sort of look at this as the grief in action. A lot of times people are feeling like they don't know what to do, they don't know what steps to take next. Um, as we are early doing this, what we've been trying to encourage people is to start with some observation in these different parts of their life. And, last time we talked about, with the relationships, with the communication, kind of observing maybe where some of the challenges may lie, where some of their pain points could be, some of the things that you've already talked about. In terms of an actionable step that someone could start with, what's a good thing that you would suggest for people to try, specifically regarding the relationships and the communication challenges they may be having?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd start by going back to the green light, yellow light, red light folks. If you just I tell people set a timer for like 2-3 minutes and list everyone you interact with on a regular basis. This could be the male person or friends and family you share a house or a workplace or a neighborhood with. And then notice kind of where they fall into. Are they green light grief ally people? If so, potentially your action is to reach out and thank them for being there and supporting you if you haven't already, if that's not already a part of your relationship. For yellow light people, simply notice and observe they are there. And for red light people, simply notice and observe they are there. And you don't have to necessarily do anything about boundary setting right now, because if you don't have the energy or the capacity, maybe not the time, but just to notice kind of where people fall on your scale. And you can go a little more gradient than I do. I have 3 distinct categories because for me, I can think a little clearly when everything's distinct. But if you have they're kind of like a yellow tilting green, like a Libra sun with an Aquarius rising or whatever the case may be, you can have a little more they're okay 75% of the time, but 25% of the time they say weird stuff or they don't remember my grief dates or things like that. But even just noticing who in your life is consistent and there for you, and who drops the ball sometimes and who has never carried the ball anywhere when it comes to your grief, can be a really helpful tool for noticing who would you like to spend more time with? Who would you like to potentially spend less time with, or maybe set some boundaries with? And then you can open up the door to exploring how would I like to set those boundaries? Which of the toxic grief tropes is present here? What would I like to ask for instead as a substitute behavior? So maybe looking at your green light people and noticing what feels the most helpful. That's a really solid place to start. But just making the list is a really simple and time-saving way to just observe where do the people in my life currently fall, and understanding too that people can move categories in their life. There's a whole section in Life After Loss Academy where I talk about kind of your green light people are in the inner circle of your garden, like the most precious part. The yellow light people are kind of on the outskirts of your garden, and the red light people are outside of a fence. And so there's some sort of boundary protecting you from interacting with them on a regular basis. I have seen people move from the outskirts of the fence, essentially the compost pile, into the yellow or the green light parts of the garden, the most sacred parts, because even the things that are hurtful and painful to us can potentially circle back around, whether they experience a loss of their own and suddenly they get it now, or they become ill or sick themselves and understand what it is to be changed by a life-changing thing, or they do the work. Your boundary with them prompts them to read a book or go to therapy or some sort of something to educate themselves on grief, and they come back and say, yeah, I was an a-hole. I'm really sorry about that. And I'd like to try to be different and reconcile the relationship, and only time and trust can see if that pans out into anything. But I tell my grieving clients and students, again, to use that right now, for now, at the end of sentences for even your sorting of your people, green light, yellow light, red light, because it's not impossible for something that was left and relegated to the compost heap to one day return to the center of your garden.
I think what I love most about that is just the hopefulness, which is very difficult for grieving people to have.
Oh,
But
sure. Yes.
but the idea that, there's one thing I say to people all the time. I said, I don't promise much in this work, but if there's one thing I promise you is that how you feel now isn't how you're always going to feel. What these relationships look like now, that can change. There's so many things. I think sometimes we feel like we've arrived. I am now grieving. This is this place that I'm going to be at, and everything that is the way it is going to stay that way. And, it's so important to be reinforcing the idea that you're changing, the people around you are changing. That's why we don't want to just say, this is over, or be necessarily giving up our hope or our idea of what a connection can look like. Because there's just too many other factors, to be considered. So I think that that's really good advice and a really good action step. I think, I don't know, for me too, personally, I love the idea of organization. This is such a jumbled mess sometimes,
Yeah.
that being able to just actually write it down is always such a helpful tool, and be able to start to understand. There's so many things that become very clear when we're doing that. So Shelby, there's so much of this today that has been so, so helpful. We had said in the beginning, we knew that we were going to just love talking about this. Before we go, Kelly, was there any other questions or anything else
I know I
for
love this, and
today?
I think this
I
is a
know.
great action step for all of our listeners to really take. This is exactly what we're looking for. I love all of this, and I feel like I've learned some things. So thank you, Shelby.
Thank
Absolutely.
you.
Absolutely. So, Shelby, if anybody wants to learn a little bit more about you or some of the things that you're doing, where could they find more information on
Yeah, I like to make it super simple because grief brain is real.
that?
ShelbyForsythia.com. That's where
Okay.
you can find Life After Loss Academy. That's where you can find all my social media if you want to follow and stay in touch. It's where you can find the free podcast, Grief Grower, which comes out every Thursday. And it's also where you can find my new book, which is called Of Course I'm Here Right Now, 3 actually helpful things to say to someone grieving. I don't have the real book copy yet, but I just finished editing all the paper copy. This is a book that grievers can buy their friends and family members. You know that how people always keep shoving books on you when you're grieving? It's like, here, read this. Your mom died, read this. Your best friend died, read this. You're going through a divorce, read this. No, you shove books in their direction and say, here, I'm grieving, read this.
Love
This
it.
is a framework that I have learned through 8 years of grief coaching of how to actually talk to people who are grieving. Because sometimes, especially as COVID taught us, when we're separated by time and distance and physical social distancing, all we have is words. And words can be the things that tear us down or build us up when we're grieving. And people are hesitant to talk to grieving people because they say, I just don't know what to say, or I'm afraid of screwing it up, or I'm not a therapist. How am I qualified to do this? This is like a very short guidebook of 3 phrases that have worked across the board for griefs of all kinds in my practice. And I've used them in real life with my friends as well. And I'm like, this is like the magic word sauce of how to talk to somebody who is grieving. It comes out in March of 2026. So you can pre-order it right now. But I'm so thrilled for it to be in the world. I'm like, no, you shove a book in their direction. And I will say, if you are a griever who feels as if you have no one in your corner right now, there is no one in your Greenlight Grief Allies column. This is also a book for if you are forced to be your own comforter in grief. Sometimes we don't get the luxury of being comforted by others. We are forced to be the griever and the comforter, similar to being the griever and the teacher. We are forced to be both of those roles at the same time. So every exercise, every script in this book is something you can also offer yourself, which is a very precious thing to do, especially when you don't have the energy to work on or set these boundaries with other people in your lives.
Yeah. Oh, that's excellent. I can't wait
I'm
to
so
see that
thrilled.
and to be able to recommend it. I mean, we talk about this and the need for it often enough, that's for sure, because,
Yeah.
there is not necessarily a clear way that people feel like they can tell people, how to be communicating. So just saying, hey, I've got something here that I think could help is a really good place to start. So Shelby, we can't thank you enough for being here today and for all that you shared. We really are very excited about I think, like Kelly and I both do sort of our own work, and we found in talking to each other that we just enjoy talking about this stuff. And I think we're all very passionate about it. And it's just, there's so much that we can be sharing that I think can help, for those that are listening. So Shelby, everything you've said today is just so wonderful and such a tremendous help to people who really, really need it. So thank you. And thank you to
Thank
everybody.
you.
Thank you for being here and for listening. Certainly remember to subscribe. We will be back next time with some more information and another guest. So stay tuned and thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Shelby.
guys.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us on the Grief Ladies.
Don't wait to feel better to get started. Getting started is what makes you feel better. Put this week's tool to work.
If today's episode helped, share it with someone who needs it and leave us a review. We'd love to hear from you.
And remember, we're here for you, your trusted grief ladies, navigating this path together.